My relationship with my mother had always been complicated, but I never imagined it would end in a courtroom with her accusing me of theft. I'm Maya Chen, 32 years old, and for most of my life I was the family disappointment. My older brother Daniel became a surgeon. My younger sister Lauren married into old money. Me. I moved to Seattle after college and took a job as an administrative assistant at a tech startup. Administrative assistant. Mom would say at family gatherings, her voice dripping with disdain. That's just a fancy word for secretary, isn't it? I never corrected her. Never mentioned that within 2 years, I'd moved into operations management. Never explained that by year 4 I was director of strategic partnerships. And I certainly never told her when I left that company at 28 with enough stock options to never work again if I chose not to. The family narrative was set. Daniel was the success, Lauren was the socialite, and Maya was the one who tried her best. I let them believe it. Life was simpler that way. My grandmother Chen, my father's mother, was the only one who seemed to see me clearly. She'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s, built a successful import business from nothing, and retired wealthy but private about her fortune. "You're like me," she told me once over tea when I was 26. "You build quietly. Let them underestimate you, Maya. It's a gift." We'd meet every month, just the two of us. She'd ask about my work, really listening, understanding the nuances of venture capital and strategic investing that I was learning. She never told the family about our meetings. Neither did I. When Grandma Chen died 3 years ago, she left specific instructions. Her estate, valued at approximately $38 million, was to be divided equally among her 3 grandchildren with one exception. Her property portfolio, worth approximately $12 million, would go entirely to me. "Maya understands real estate," her will stated simply. "She'll know what to do with it." Mom contested the will immediately. Not because she wanted the properties, she wanted them sold and the money redistributed fairly. The legal battle lasted 8 months. In the end, the will was ironclad. I inherited the properties. What Mom didn't know was that I'd already been building my own portfolio for years. Grandma's properties were added to holdings I'd been quietly acquiring since I was 24. By the time I was 30, I owned commercial real estate in 4 states, held silent partnerships in 6 businesses, and had an investment portfolio that would make most people's eyes water. I still drove a practical Honda. Still lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Still dressed like someone making $70,000 a year. Mom remarried 2 years ago. Richard Thornton was 58, charming, and owned what he called a boutique resort business, the Ocean View Grand Resort in coastal California. It was beautiful. 47 rooms, beachfront property, exclusive clientele. What Richard didn't tell my mother, what he didn't tell anyone, was that his resort was drowning in debt. The property had been mortgaged 3 times. He was 6 months behind on vendor payments. His investors had pulled out. I knew because I was one of those investors. Or rather, one of my holding companies was. I'd purchased a controlling interest in Ocean View Grand Resort 18 months before Richard started dating my mother. Not because I wanted to own a resort, but because the property itself was valuable. The business was failing, but the land was worth $30 million minimum. Richard had no idea who his silent partner was. All communications went through my property management firm, Cascade Holdings LLC. As far as he knew, his mysterious backer was some faceless corporate entity. I watched their relationship develop with quiet interest. Mom was happier than I'd seen her in years. Richard was attentive, generous with gestures if not actual money, and treated her like royalty. At their engagement party last year, Richard made a speech. "I'm building an empire," he announced to the assembled guests. "Ocean View Grand is just the beginning. I've got investors ready to fund 3 more properties. We're going to be the premier boutique resort family on the West Coast." Mom beamed. Daniel and Lauren congratulated them. I sipped my wine and said nothing. The investors Richard mentioned? They didn't exist. The funding he referenced? It was my money funneled through Cascade Holdings, and I'd already decided not to invest another dollar. 3 months after the engagement, Mom called me. "Maya, we need to talk about Grandma's properties." I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports. "What about them?" "Richard and I have been discussing it. Those properties were meant for the whole family. It's not fair that you got everything." "Grandma's will was very specific, Mom." Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Everyone knows that. Her voice turned sharp. We want you to sell the properties and distribute the money properly. 1/3 to you, 1/3 to Daniel, 1/3 to Lauren. That's fair. The properties were now worth approximately $18 million. I'd invested in improvements, repositioned some of the commercial spaces, and increased their value by 50%. The will was already contested and upheld, I said calmly. The properties are mine. Don't be selfish, Maya. Family should come first. I thought about all the family gatherings where I'd been dismissed, all the comments about my little secretary job, all the times my accomplishments went unacknowledged. I'll think about it, I lied. 2 weeks later, Mom called again. This time Richard was on the line too. Maya, your mother and I have been talking, Richard began, his voice smooth and practiced. We have an opportunity to expand the resort business, but we need capital. If you sold just 2 of those properties, we could. I'm not selling. Don't be short-sighted, Mom snapped. This is a real investment opportunity, not like whatever you're doing up there in Seattle. What I was doing in Seattle was managing a portfolio worth north of $60 million. But they didn't need to know that. The answer is no. The calls became more frequent, more demanding. Mom started showing up at Daniel and Lauren's houses, complaining about my selfishness. She posted vague messages on social media about family betrayal and greedy children. Richard sent me investment prospectuses for his expansion plans, each one more optimistic and less realistic than the last. I ignored them all. 6 months ago, I received a legal notice. Mom and Richard were suing me for undue influence over Grandma Chen, claiming I'd manipulated her into changing her will. The lawsuit demanded that I either sell all of Grandma's properties and distribute the proceeds equally among her grandchildren, or pay my siblings $9 million each in compensation. We went to court last month. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Mom sat at the plaintiff's table with Richard beside her, both dressed impeccably. Her lawyer, Robert Morrison from Morrison & Blake, looked confident and expensive. Daniel and Lauren sat in the gallery showing family solidarity. Neither had joined the lawsuit, but neither had spoken to me since it was filed. I sat alone at the defendant's table with my attorney, Catherine Park. Catherine was a specialist in estate law and had reviewed Grandma's will extensively. This is going to be straightforward, she told me before. The will is solid. They have no case. But I wasn't worried about the will. The judge, Honorable Susan Martinez, called the court to order. Morrison stood. Your Honor, this case is about a vulnerable elderly woman who was manipulated by her granddaughter in her final years. The defendant, Maya Chen, used her position of trust to convince Mrs. Helen Chen to disproportionately favor her in the will, cutting out the other grandchildren from properties that rightfully should have been shared equally. He presented his case methodically. Character witnesses who testified that I'd been visiting Grandma more frequently in her last years. Financial records showing the value of the properties I'd inherited. Testimony about how Grandma had been on medication that could affect judgment. It was all circumstantial, all easily refutable, but Morrison presented it well. Then it was Mom's turn to testify. She walked to the stand wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Richard gave her an encouraging nod. Mrs. Thornton, Morrison began. Can you describe your relationship with your mother-in-law? We were very close, Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. She was like a second mother to me. This was news to me. I couldn't remember Mom visiting Grandma more than a handful of times in the last decade. And how would you describe the defendant's relationship with Mrs. Chen? Maya barely visited, Mom said, looking directly at me. Until the last few years. Then suddenly she was there constantly, isolating my mother-in-law from the rest of the family. I kept my expression neutral. Morrison continued. What do you believe happened? Mom's voice turned bitter. She manipulated a sick old woman into giving her millions of dollars in property. She stole from this family. Objection, Catherine said calmly. Speculation and inflammatory language. Sustained, Judge Martinez said. Mrs. Thornton, please stick to facts. But Mom wasn't done. My daughter has always been secretive. Always hiding things. We didn't even know she was visiting my mother-in-law until after the will was read. She planned this. She isolated Helen and convinced her to cut out Daniel and Lauren. Morrison nodded sympathetically. And what are you seeking from this court? Justice, Mom said firmly. Either Maya sells those properties and distributes the money fairly among all 3 grandchildren, or she pays Daniel and Lauren what they're owed. 9 million each. That's only fair. Richard was nodding along, his expression serious and supportive. When it was Catherine's turn to cross-examine, she was surgical. Mrs. Thornton, how many times did you visit Mrs. Chen in the year before her death? Mom hesitated. Several times. I have visitor logs from the assisted living facility. You visited twice. Would you like to revise your answer? Mom's face flushed. I was busy. I called her. Phone records show 3 calls, each under 5 minutes. In an entire year. Morrison objected, but the damage was done. Catherine continued. You testified that you and Mrs. Chen were very close. Did you know her favorite tea? What does that have to do with? Did you know the names of her friends at the facility? Her doctors? Her favorite activities? That's not the point. The point, Mrs. Thornton, is that you barely knew your mother-in-law at all, while the defendant visited her twice a month for 6 years. Isn't that correct? Mom's lawyer objected again. Judge Martinez allowed the question. I was busy, Mom repeated weakly. Catherine presented visitor logs, photos of me and Grandma together, even cards Grandma had written to me. The relationship was documented, genuine and long-standing. Then it was my turn to testify. Morrison stood. Miss Chen, did you know you would inherit these properties? No, I said honestly. Grandma never discussed her will with me. But you visited her frequently in her last years. Why? Because I loved her. Because she was interesting and wise and I enjoyed her company. Very convenient, Morrison said sarcastically. Did you discuss real estate with her? Sometimes. She'd built a successful business. I was interested in learning from her experience. So you did discuss her properties. We discussed real estate in general. Market trends, investment strategies. She mentored me. Morrison's eyes gleamed. Mentored you in how to acquire property? Mentored me in business. He shifted tactics. Miss Chen, what do you do for a living? Here it comes, I thought. I'm a private investor. What does that mean exactly? I invest in various businesses and properties. And your annual income? Catherine objected. Relevance, Your Honor? I'm establishing the defendant's financial situation, Morrison argued. It goes to motive. Judge Martinez nodded. Answer the question, Ms. Chen. My income varies, I said carefully. Last year approximately 200,000. Morrison smirked. 200,000. And yet you drive a modest car, live in a modest apartment. Where does all that money go? Investments. Savings. Living expenses. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you needed your grandmother's properties because you're actually not financially successful at all? That this investor story is a facade? I looked at him calmly. No. Then prove it. Show us your portfolio. Catherine stood. Your Honor, my client's finances are private unless the plaintiff can show relevance to the case at hand. Morrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, if the defendant is actually wealthy, it undermines the motive for manipulating Mrs. Chen. But if she's struggling financially, living beyond her means, it proves she needed this inheritance. Judge Martinez considered. I'll allow limited financial disclosure. Ms. Chen, you may present summary documentation of your financial situation. I nodded to Catherine. She'd been prepared for this. He handed me a folder. I opened it and placed a single document on the stand. This is a summary of my investment portfolio as of last month, I said. Prepared by my financial advisor. Morrison took the document. His expression changed as he read it. This says your portfolio is valued at over $60 million. Approximately 62 million, yes. The courtroom went silent. I saw Daniel's mouth fall open in the gallery. Lauren grabbed his arm. Mom's face went white. Morrison recovered quickly. Your Honor, I'd like to request verification of these claims. Anyone can create a document. My financial advisor is present if you'd like him to testify, Catherine said smoothly. As is my accountant. We can provide bank statements, property records, investment documentation. All of it will verify that Ms. Chen has been building her portfolio independently for nearly a decade, beginning years before Mrs. Helen Chen's death. Morrison looked at Mom. She looked at Richard. Richard's expression had gone very strange. Judge Martinez called a 15-minute recess. I pulled out my phone and made the call I'd been planning for months. Cascade Holdings, my property manager answered. David, it's Maya. Execute the sale order for Ocean View Grand Resort. I want it listed immediately. Send the notification to all parties of interest. Including Mr. Thornton? Especially Mr. Thornton. I hung up and looked across the courtroom. Richard was on his phone, his face growing redder by the second. When court resumed, Morrison looked shaken. Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to verify the defendant's financial claims. Denied, Judge Martinez said. Ms. Park, does your client have anything to add? Catherine stood. Your Honor, we'd like to present additional context to this case. She approached the bench with another folder. The plaintiffs have accused my client of theft and manipulation. But the evidence shows that Ms. Chen has been financially independent and successful for years. She didn't need Mrs. Helen Chen's properties. However, there is someone in this courtroom who desperately needs money. Morrison shot to his feet. Objection. This is a trial about the defendant's actions, not. It's directly relevant, Catherine said calmly. Your Honor, may I approach? Judge Martinez nodded. Catherine placed documents in front of the judge. These are financial records for Ocean View Grand Resort, owned by Richard Thornton, the plaintiff's fiancé. The resort is deeply insolvent. Mr. Thornton has been seeking investors for months. He owes approximately $4 million in back payments to vendors and has mortgaged the property 3 times. Richard stood up. That's private business information. How did you? Public records, Catherine said smoothly. Available to anyone who looks. But here's the interesting part, Your Honor. The primary investor in Ocean View Grand Resort, the entity that owns 51% of the business, is Cascade Holdings LLC. She turned to look at me. Cascade Holdings is one of my client's investment companies. Ms. Chen has been the silent majority owner of Mr. Thornton's resort for 18 months. The courtroom erupted. Richard's face went from red to purple. That's impossible. My investor is, you're lying. I have the incorporation documents, Catherine said. Purchase agreements. Board minutes. All of it showing that Maya Chen, through Cascade Holdings, purchased a controlling interest in Ocean View Grand Resort in March 18 months ago, 7 months before Mr. Thornton began dating her mother. Mom was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Judge Martinez banged her gavel. Order. Catherine wasn't done. Your Honor, this lawsuit isn't about protecting family interests. It's about Mr. Thornton manipulating Mrs. Thornton into suing her daughter to force a property sale that would generate cash he desperately needs for his failing business. He likely planned to convince Mrs. Thornton to invest that money directly into his resort. That's a lie. Richard shouted. Then explain this. Catherine placed another document down. This is an email from Mr. Thornton to Mrs. Thornton, sent 2 weeks after they got engaged. In it, he outlines his vision for using family resources to expand the resort business. He specifically mentions the Chen properties as accessible capital. Mom stood up slowly. Richard. He didn't look at her. He was staring at me. You've been sabotaging me this whole time. No, I said calmly. I've been owning 51% of your business this whole time. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. A text from David, listing active. Thornton just received notification. I watched Richard check his phone. Watched his face go gray. What did you do? He whispered. I instructed my property management company to list Ocean View Grand Resort for sale, I said clearly. As the majority owner, that's my right. The property will sell for approximately $28 to $30 million. After debts are cleared, you'll receive about 40% of the remainder. That should be around $4 million. You can't. I absolutely can. It's in the shareholder agreement you signed. Any majority owner can force a sale with 30 days' notice. You received that notice about 2 minutes ago. Mom sank back into her chair. You own his resort? I own 51% of a failing business attached to valuable land, I corrected. I tried to help Richard turn it around. provided capital, brought in consultants, gave him every opportunity to make it profitable. He spent the money on his lifestyle instead. So yes, now I'm selling. Richard looked like he might be sick. Morrison had gone very quiet. Judge Martinez looked at the documents Catherine had presented, then at me, then at my mother. Mrs. Thornton, she said quietly. Did you know your daughter was a successful investor? Mom shook her head mutely. Did you know she owned Mr. Thornton's business? Another head shake. Did you ever ask her about her life? Her work? Her actual financial situation? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. She's a secretary. No, I said. I was an administrative assistant for 2 years, a decade ago. Since then, I've been director of strategic partnerships at a tech company, a private equity consultant, and for the last 4 years, a full-time private investor managing a portfolio worth over $60 million. You never asked. You just assumed. The judge turned to Morrison. Counselor, do you wish to continue with this case? Morrison looked at Mom. Mom was staring at the table. Your Honor, he said slowly. I'd like to request a recess to consult with my clients. Granted. 1 hour. The recess lasted 45 minutes. When we returned, Morrison stood. Your Honor, the plaintiffs wish to withdraw their complaint. So noted, Judge Martinez said. She looked at me. Miss Chen, do you wish to pursue a countersuit for legal fees or malicious prosecution? Catherine glanced at me. I shook my head. No, Your Honor. I just want this to be over. The judge nodded. Case dismissed. As people filed out, Richard tried to approach me. My attorney stepped between us. Mr. Thornton, I'd advise you to communicate through your lawyer from now on, she said firmly. He looked at Mom. Did you know? Did you know she owned my resort? Mom shook her head. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Richard's voice rose. You said she was nobody. You said she was just a secretary with delusions. You said. That's enough, Catherine said sharply. Mr. Thornton, you're making a scene. Security was already approaching. Richard left, still talking to himself. Mom stood there, holding her purse, looking lost. Maya, she said softly. I waited. I didn't know. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about all the times I could have. All the family dinners where I stayed quiet. All the dismissive comments I let slide. Would you have believed me? I asked. She didn't answer. Daniel approached cautiously. Maya, I had no idea about any of this. I know. The portfolio, the resort, all of it. Why didn't you say something? Because it wasn't relevant, I said. My success doesn't need your validation. Lauren was crying quietly in the corner. Her husband had his arm around her. I picked up my briefcase. The resort sale will take about 90 days, I told Mom. Richard will get his percentage. What you do with that information is up to you. Maya, wait. I was done waiting. I walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine. Catherine followed. That went well, she said dryly. Define well. You won. Decisively. And you made your point. I checked my phone. 3 messages from David about potential buyers for Ocean View Grand. 2 from my financial advisor. 1 from my best friend asking how court went. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now I sell a resort, reorganize my portfolio and get back to my actual life. And your family? I thought about Mom's face when she realized what I'd become. About Richard's collapse when he understood who really had the power. About Daniel and Lauren's shocked expressions. They'll figure it out, I said. Or they won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Maya Chen. Miss Chen, this is Robert Morrison. I wanted to apologize for. Save it, I said. You did your job. It's over. I also wanted to let you know that Mr. Thornton called me. He's talking about appealing or finding some way to block the resort sale. He can try. The shareholder agreement is ironclad. I had the best lawyers in Seattle write it. I told him that. He's not thinking clearly. That's his problem, not mine. I hung up. Catherine smiled. You really don't need my help anymore, do you? I never needed help with the legal stuff, I admitted. I just needed a witness. A witness. To the fact that I tried. That I gave them every chance to know me, to ask, to see who I actually was. And they chose not to. We reached my car, the practical Honda that Mom had mocked so many times. "What are you going to do now?" Catherine asked. I thought about it. About Grandma Chen and her quiet wisdom. About building something real without needing applause. "Same thing I've always done," I said. "Build quietly. Let them underestimate me. It's a gift." Ocean View Grand Resort sold for $29 million to a hotel development company. After clearing debts and fees, Richard received approximately $3.8 million. Mom called off the wedding 2 weeks after the trial. Daniel sent me an email apologizing and asking if we could have coffee. We met once. It was awkward but civil. He admitted he'd never really known me at all. Lauren sent a card. Just a card, no meeting requested. It said, "I'm sorry for not asking." I appreciated that. Mom sent nothing for 2 months. Then one evening my doorbell rang. She stood there with a bag from the Asian market. "I brought oolong tea," she said. "Your grandmother's favorite." I let her in. We sat in my modest living room, the one she'd never visited before, and I made tea the way Grandma had taught me. "This is a nice place," Mom said, looking around. "It serves my needs." "Maya, I spent 3 hours reading about you online. Articles about your investments, interviews you've done for finance magazines, a profile in Forbes. You've been building this for a decade." "Yes." "And I never asked." "No." She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to fix this." "I don't know if you can," I said honestly. "You sued me, Mom. You accused me of stealing from the family. You stood in court and called me a liar and a manipulator." "I know. Because Richard told you to." "Yes." She looked down at her tea. "He's gone, by the way. Moved to Arizona. I heard he's trying to start over with his settlement money. Good luck to him." "Maya, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did you know? When he started dating me, did you know about the resort?" I nodded. "I knew he needed money. I didn't know he'd use you to try to get it. Why didn't you warn me? Would you have listened?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. We finished our tea in silence. When she left, she hugged me, brief and uncertain. "Can we try again?" she asked. "Can we start over?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. But it has to be real, Mom. You have to actually want to know me. Not the version you created, but the actual person I am." "I do," she said. "I want to know who my daughter really is." "Then ask," I said. "Actually ask." She did. We started meeting once a month like I used to do with Grandma. Slowly, carefully, we built something new. It wasn't perfect. We didn't become best friends. But it was real. And sometimes that's enough. I kept building my portfolio. Kept investing quietly. Kept letting people underestimate me when it was useful. Grandma Chen had been right all along. It was a gift.